What's up, Block D? Last Thursday, I think a bunch of you guys were at that Harvard training thing, so you missed the lecture on the macro section. So the goal is today we'll talk a bit about the macro for the Paper1B, and then the micro is what you're doing for homework, and that I can give you written feedback. So with 1B questions, you're going to be asked real life examples. And, right now, if you're struggling to come up with one immediately, no worries. I mean, the idea is we'll have a class bank together. So that way, immediately, inelastic good, gasoline, right? Elastic good, Coca-Cola, a stimulus package, 2008 financial crisis, or we'll have a list that you could kind of get to right away. So speaking of that list, when it comes to contractionary monetary policy, a great example you can use, and that's in fact also provided by IB as an exemplar, is the 1970s USA. So what's happening during this period is there is stagflation, right? Stagflation, which has been caused from the oil shocks of 1973. And this has led towards inflation. And the Federal Reserve is freaking out. They're saying, all right, we have some serious inflation. What can we do to decrease inflation? Well, we can take policies that would shift AD to the left. Now, quick reminder, there's two ways to shift AD to the left. You have the fiscal route and you have the monetary. Now, the monetary route is what they are asking for. But why not? Let's talk about fiscal for just a moment. So fiscal would be things like taxes, right? Consumer tax, VATs, income tax, corporate tax, etc. You cut them, people are going to spend more, right? So it's shifted to the right. And the other is government projects. So if government decides to build roads, that shifts AD to the right? Provides people with jobs, and vice versa. If they practice, and this is a good word to remember, austerity, that means the government is choosing not to spend money. That would shift AD to the left. Now, we're not talking about fiscal, though. We're not talking about, currently that would be run by Janet Yellen. We're talking about monetary. We're talking about the central bank, right? What can the central bank do to shift AD? Now, there are a bunch of things actually they could do. So let's go ahead and list them off. So for example, one thing they could do is change interest rates. So if interest rates go up, that has an impact on, let's actually go ahead and draw out SIG XM. So if interest rates are up, consumers spending less money, businesses investing less money, governments, they're spending less money, and then imports and exports. And this is an interesting point that we haven't talked about for a while. High interest means the currency gets stronger. So what the heck does that mean? It appreciates, as in, if we're talking about Japan, if it used to be 100 yen to $1, it is now 50 yen. This is kind of extreme, but why not? 50 yen to $1. So how does that impact exports and imports? Well, if the currency is strong, people are going to buy more and they are going to export less. And what that means is if people are, so exports minus imports. So actually, let me reverse that. They are exporting less and they are importing more. So you're getting more negative, but you're getting less positive, less positive, less positive, less positive. So in short, all of these things are shifting AD to the left, right? It is decreasing the GDP, and that has other effects too, right? So what are the other effects? Think about the employment rate or the unemployment rate. So the number of people who are being unemployed will go up. Right, what else is happening? As you can see, when P1 goes to P2, we are having deflation. And this is precisely the purpose, right, of why the government in the 1970s is practicing such measures. Now, what else can the monetary branches do? OMOs, right? Open market operations. So this is when the central bank sells government bonds to commercial banks. So let's kind of visualize it. So essentially you have the market, then over here we have the government. And when the government buys bonds, right? They are buying here a bond and they are putting money into the system, more money in the system, and we've seen this graph before. More money in the system means, we'll say money supply over here, interest rate. As money supply increases, interest rates go down, right? And as money supply increases, it's the other way around, interest rates go up. So in this case, what is the government doing? Well, they are selling the bonds, right? If they sell bonds, what are they doing? They're taking money out of the system. They're taking money out of the system, money out of the system. So if we can kind of visualize what's happening here is by removing money from the markets, they're able to raise interest rates, which then thus moves 80 to the left. One more thing you should know is reserve requirements. Reserve requirements is where a bank has a set amount of money they must put aside that they cannot lend. So we'll just use super simple numbers here. Let's say, for example, a bank has $100. Let's say the reserve requirement is 10%. Well, in this case, they could lend out 90, but they must keep $10 in the bank. Now, if the government wants less spending, right? We want less money supply. We should increase this figure. So let's say they change the reserve requirement from 10% to 20%. Well, in that case, if a bank has $100, now they're only able to lend 80 and they must keep 20 in the bank. So that's less money they're able to lend out, 90 to 80. Less money supply means we're shifting to the left here. Inverse relationship, so interest rates go up. High interest rates, as we spoke about earlier, means less spending for everyone, right? Consumer, businesses, government, and it also means more imports and less exports. Now, is there any points here that I'm missing? Well, think about CLASP, right? And the ones I really like to focus on is short run and long run. So short run, we are seeing GDP go down. We're seeing unemployment go up. We're seeing deflation. But in the long run, what we could say is that if the government is implementing all these policies, we could see a continual contractionary market, right? As we shift to the left, right? As Y1 goes to Y2 because of these policies, think about a few things we haven't spoken about yet. For example, business confidence, which you could measure, for example, with the stock market going down. Consumer confidence. One way you can measure this is through the unemployment rate. This is also going down. So in the long run, you could see a real slump happening because of such policies. Now, other points to consider is how different stakeholders are impacted by these decisions, right? For example, to raise interest rates. So let's go over the big ones. And let's get some fresh space here. So ones you always want to think about immediately, you got consumers, you got businesses or producers, you have the government, you have employment, and sometimes you could even split the consumers into, upper income. I know it's really messy, but right now I am not sitting at a table, so it's very hard for me to write here. All right, so let's go through each one. The consumer. We'll start with the lower income consumer. The lower income consumer is going to be hurt by unemployment more than the high upper income consumer because they have less to start with. Upper income consumers, not so much in general, but a point we should bring in here is deflation. And this actually does connect to other stakeholders beyond sort of what's here. If we think of deflation, one thing to think about whenever we see basically big shifts in price level is lenders versus borrowers. So one thing to consider here is who wins, right? Who wins when inflation or deflation happens? When deflation happens, the person who borrowed the money is a loser and the lender is the winner. So why is that? Well, let's just use let's come up with a very simple example. Let's say you have person A here. They borrow $1 million at, let's say, 4% for their house from the bank. Well, if the country then has tremendous deflation, he still has to continue to pay at 4%, even though everyone's incomes have gone down, right? Whereas the lender is still going to get that 4% back. And vice versa, right? Why not? Why are we talking about deflation? Let's say the scenario is the other way around. Inflation happens. Inflation's really high. Let's say it's at 10%. Well, in that case, we can also connect this to, for example, real interest rate. So if we're looking for the real interest rate, it's just simply the original minus inflation. Oh, sorry, it's 10, not 8, 10. Well, in that case, it's negative 6%, which in that case is a great win for the borrower, right? The borrower is tremendously benefiting from inflation. But anyways, we're not talking about inflation. We're talking about deflation. So let's go back over here. So when deflation is happening, the businesses are suffering, right? Because they're producing less. The government has pros and cons. So the pro is less spending means less deficit, right? So less deficit. However, potential negative could be popularity, right? Austerity has basically never been a popular policy, right? Because people generally want the government to create policies that will encourage businesses to spend, right? Encourage people to spend. So that could be a potential risk there. And then finally, employment. Well, this is pretty straightforward. We've already talked about it. Employment is not good, right? Unemployment is going up. Now, is there anything else we should cover here? No, I think those are the big ones. And I love that, people are asking, for those who were present on Thursday, there were a lot of questions, right? For example, I think it was Mert who brought up, well, I know LRIS is not in this question, but can we talk about, LRIS, right? Like, how can it be shifted to the left, to the right? And then we kind of talked about how, think about the 4 factors of production, right? Things like land, capital, population, right? If you get more people to come to your country, it's going to go to the right. If you have a shrinking population, it's going to go to the left. If your country has technological advances, like we're seeing this right now with AI, that will push it to the right. Your country discovers new resources for oil. That's going to push LRS to the right. So, that was an example of a good discussion. So, but I think at this point it's probably about 15 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. But yeah, I just, this is for the half of you or so that missed it. Apologies that it's kind of especially a very messy diagram. But as long as you get the points, that's fine. Again, so that's contractional monetary policy. And yeah, I mean, really, expansionary monetary policy is just the opposite, right? It's AD shifting to the right, and pretty much the inverse of basically everything I just said, right? Unemployment would go down, inflation would occur. When inflation happens, the consumers, for example, people with assets benefit because, the assets go up in price and so forth. There's, almost, I'd say almost exactly inverted, not quite. But on that note, that's it from me for today. So again, this is for the 7 or 8 of you that missed the lecture on Thursday. And yeah, see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.